Hi, I'm Rachel Adams, and if you've ever trusted someone you loved only to have them betray you, you'll want to hear my story. It all started with a strange-smelling dish my husband made for me. But what happened next changed everything. Stick around to find out how I uncovered the truth, and trust me, you won't see the twist coming. So, tell me, what's the most shocking betrayal you've ever faced? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I should have known something was wrong the moment I tasted the cake. It's the kind of moment you can't take back. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary when Daniel served me that slice of chocolate mousse. After all, it was just dessert, right? The end of an otherwise calm family dinner. Yet, as soon as it touched my tongue, I felt it. The faint metallic taste lingered in my mouth. My stomach churned and my throat tightened. Was I being paranoid? Or was this truly another attempt at sabotaging me? The dining room was quiet, and the soft hum of the air conditioning mixed with the clink of utensils on plates. Chicago had been experiencing a rare heat wave, and the room felt warmer than usual. The soft overhead lights created a cozy, dim glow. But as I sat there, a cold chill crawled up my spine. It wasn't from the air conditioning. It was something else. Something unsettling. I looked across the table at Daniel. He sat there, smiling at me, completely unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the unease that was slowly swallowing me whole. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. He had been different lately, distant, distracted, like he was trying to keep something from me. And then there was Vanessa, sitting across from me. Her usual calm demeanor seemingly masking a flicker of something else. It was in the way her eyes darted from me to Daniel, as though she was waiting for something, waiting for me to react. I didn't know what it was, but something in her gaze unsettled me. "Try the cake," Daniel had said, his voice too cheerful, too controlled. "I made it just for you." His words sounded so casual, but I couldn't help but wonder why he felt the need to make a special dessert. He didn't usually go out of his way like this. It felt off. The whole evening had felt off. I took a cautious bite of the cake, trying to keep up appearances. My stomach flipped, and I forced a smile, trying to disguise the unease creeping up on me. The texture was too smooth, the taste too perfect. It wasn't like anything Daniel had ever made before. Why did I feel nauseous every time I was around Vanessa and Daniel? How many times had I brushed off the weird stomach pains, the sudden headaches, the dizziness? I had convinced myself it was just stress or maybe something I ate earlier in the day. But now, sitting there, I couldn't ignore the mounting suspicion that something wasn't right. My gut was telling me that I had been wrong to trust them for so long. I glanced down at my plate, forcing myself to finish the bite I'd taken, but I could barely taste it anymore. My mind was already racing ahead. Was this just a coincidence, or was there something more to it? I didn't want to believe it. After all, we were family. Daniel was my husband. Vanessa was his sister. But what if my trust had been misplaced all this time? What if they had been using me? I started to question everything. Every little moment. Every strange glance. Every time I had felt sick after visiting their house. It all began to add up. I felt like I had been blind, or worse, I had been too afraid to see what was right in front of me. Daniel continued talking about something trivial, some work project or another, but I could barely focus on his words. My thoughts were consumed with the cake in front of me and the sick feeling growing in my stomach. I glanced at Vanessa, watching her carefully. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Daniel. A small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. A smile that felt far too calculated. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing some kind of game, one that I hadn't been invited to play, and I was done being the fool. I set my fork down and wiped my mouth with the napkin, trying to hide my discomfort. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to find out the truth. But how? I couldn't just sit here and wait for answers to fall into my lap. Something inside me told me this time was different. This time, I couldn't afford to let it slide. If they thought I was going to let this go, they were sorely mistaken. As Daniel and Vanessa continued to chat, I excused myself from the table. I needed a moment alone to collect my thoughts, to figure out what to do next. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a rush of adrenaline flood my veins. I wasn't just going to wait and see what happened. I was going to take control of the situation. The evening dragged on, but my mind was already elsewhere. I didn't trust them, and I knew I couldn't continue pretending everything was normal. Whatever was going on between Daniel and Vanessa, it wasn't going to remain hidden for much longer. The doubt was there now, and it wasn't going away. I didn't expect it to feel like this, like I was holding my breath, waiting for something to break. The cake wasn't the only thing off that night. As I replayed the events in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something had shifted between us, between me and Daniel, between me and Vanessa. When I had refused to eat more of the dessert, Daniel had narrowed his eyes at me. I'd noticed it, his look of mild disapproval, as if I'd disappointed him. I couldn't tell if it was the kind of look a husband gives his wife when she's being too picky about food, or if it was something else. Vanessa, ever the charming sister-in-law, had flashed me her usual warm smile, but tonight it had seemed just a little too tight, a little too forced, a smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. It felt as though she were trying too hard to maintain an air of innocence, an innocence I was no longer sure she deserved. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew it. I wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. I needed to act. The next morning, the house was quiet, the calm before the storm. I stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, the mug warm in my hands. The house, once so familiar, now felt foreign, almost suffocating. It had always been my safe place, but now, with each passing moment, it seemed more like a trap. I could hear Vanessa and Daniel talking in the living room, their voices low and unintelligible. But the silence in the house was unnerving. It was as if the walls themselves were hiding something from me, and I was determined to find out what. The house that used to feel like home now felt like a place I no longer recognized. There was no more warmth in these walls, only the cool shadow of secrets. Every conversation felt like a performance, a carefully crafted act, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. As I listened to their voices, my suspicion grew. Why had I been so blind before? Why hadn't I noticed the subtle clues, those looks, those hints that something was wrong? But no more. Today I wasn't going to sit by and let them play me. If they thought I wouldn't notice, if they thought I would keep playing the role of the naive wife, they were sorely mistaken. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. Without telling anyone, I made my decision. The thought had been brewing in my mind for a while now, but I hadn't acted on it until this morning. I was done being the perfect wife, the one who always said yes, the one who never questioned. Today, I was going to take control, and it started with something small, something seemingly insignificant, but I knew it would be the catalyst. I was going to switch the plates. I moved quietly through the house, pretending to scroll through my phone to avoid drawing attention, but every step I took felt like a leap of faith. It was a small rebellion, but it was mine. I glanced at the dining room table where the remnants of our breakfast lay, half-eaten. Daniel and Vanessa were engrossed in some conversation, their voices muted. I walked toward the table, and without hesitation, I switched my plate with Vanessa's. My heart pounded in my chest as I did it. I couldn't explain why, but I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was my first real move. I wasn't going to sit back anymore. I couldn't just trust them blindly. And in that small, deliberate action, I took back some control. I wasn't going to wait for the truth to find me. I was going to force it out into the open. I sat back down at the table and pretended to continue eating. My stomach was tight, my mind racing. Would they notice? Would they catch on? As I watched Vanessa, she didn't seem to notice the switch. Her eyes were still fixed on Daniel, her hands absent-mindedly reaching for the fork. She took a bite of the cake without hesitation, and I could feel my pulse quicken. Her face changed almost instantly. A flicker of confusion crossed her features, followed by a quick glance at her plate. Her fork trembled slightly as she set it down. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at the cake, almost as if she were trying to process what was wrong. The room felt silent, too quiet. My mind raced, and I fought to keep my expression neutral, but inside, everything was screaming. This wasn't a coincidence. This was it. This was what I had feared, what I had been suspecting all along. Vanessa's reaction confirmed everything. She had no idea that I had switched the plates. She had no idea I was watching. But her reaction, the tremor in her hand, the momentary look of confusion, was all I needed to know. They had been doing this to me. It wasn't just a matter of paranoia anymore. This was a deliberate act, and they had been doing it for far too long. I stood up abruptly, my heart racing, and excused myself from the table. I needed to get away, to process what had just happened. The truth was out there, and now I had a path to follow. I wasn't going to let this go. I headed toward the study, my mind already working 1,000 miles per hour. It was just the beginning, but now I had confirmation. I couldn't pretend anymore. I knew what was going on, and I was going to make sure they didn't get away with it. I took a deep breath as I closed the door behind me, trying to steady my nerves. The rest of the day was a blur, but one thing was certain. The game had changed, and I wasn't the one being played anymore. I should have confronted them right then and there, but something held me back, an instinct that told me to wait, to watch a little longer. As Vanessa stumbled from the table, her face pale, I realized that everything I'd suspected was true. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a coincidence. What I had feared, what had been eating away at me, was finally out in the open. I had seen enough. I didn't need to jump to conclusions anymore. All the pieces fit. They had been poisoning me. I watched her struggle to stand, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. She looked confused, disoriented, as if the world around her was spinning out of control. I stayed in the study, just beyond the doorway, my phone recording every moment. I had to keep it together, had to stay calm. I couldn't let them see what I was doing. Not yet. Daniel rushed to her side, his voice rising in panic. "Vanessa, what's happening? What's wrong?" His frantic movements only confirmed my suspicion. His panic didn't look like genuine concern. It looked like someone who had been caught, someone who knew they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Vanessa's hand clutched her stomach, and I could hear her groan from where I stood. My stomach tightened in sympathy, but my mind was clearer than ever. This was no accident. This was deliberate. I steadied my breath and forced myself to focus. The quiet of the house was deafening. The din of Daniel's frantic calls to 911 didn't drown out the growing certainty in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I was watching them unravel, watching their carefully constructed facade crack and shatter. I didn't make a move. I didn't rush in to comfort or demand answers. Instead, I stayed where I was, watching through the crack in the doorway, watching as Vanessa's hands shook with increasing intensity. I had to know more. I didn't trust Daniel, and I sure as hell didn't trust Vanessa. I had to get the proof, the confirmation that I wasn't just imagining things, that this was real. My phone was recording everything, every word, every action. I had to make sure this time there would be no denial, no excuse. I couldn't afford to let them talk their way out of this. Vanessa started to stir. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and she tried to sit up. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she seemed lost, disoriented, like she couldn't understand what was happening to her. It didn't take long for her to focus on Daniel. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice weak but filled with a strange mixture of fear and fury. "James, what did you put in it?" Daniel froze. He looked down at her, his expression shifting from panic to something else, something more guarded, more defensive. I knew he was trying to cover his tracks, trying to avoid acknowledging what was happening, but he couldn't hide it anymore. "Nothing," Daniel mumbled, his voice faltering. "It's not what you think." But Vanessa wasn't having it. She reached up, her hand shaking as she grabbed his sleeve. "You promised," she hissed, "that it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting. You said it wouldn't be noticeable. You said it wouldn't leave any trace." A chill ran down my spine as I listened to her words. The board meeting. That's why they had been doing this. They had been trying to sabotage me, to make me sick so I wouldn't show up, so I wouldn't be able to present. But it was more than that, I realized. They hadn't just wanted me to fail professionally. They had wanted me out of the picture completely. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the edge of the doorway, my phone still recording. My heart hammered in my chest. They had been poisoning me, slowly but surely. And now, finally, I had the proof. Vanessa's voice grew more frantic as she continued. "You said just enough, that's all we needed. But now it's gone too far. What if she dies?" Daniel's face paled, and I saw the truth in his eyes. He hadn't meant for it to go this far, had he? Or maybe he had. Maybe he had known all along that this was the only way to get rid of me, to take control of everything we had built together. I couldn't trust him anymore. I couldn't trust either of them. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my phone, locked the door behind me, and called 911. I spoke clearly, steadily, my voice betraying none of the fear that was bubbling up inside me. "Emergency," I said. "I need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive. My sister-in-law appears to be having a severe reaction to something she ate. She's conscious but experiencing tremors. Please hurry." I paused, glancing back at Daniel and Vanessa. His face was ashen, her face twisted with fear. But I felt none of that fear. I had already made my decision. I had already taken my first step toward exposing the truth. As I spoke to the dispatcher, I knew this wasn't just about getting help for Vanessa anymore. This was about making sure they didn't get away with it. I wasn't going to be their next victim. I wasn't going to let this slide. I stayed on the line with 911, making sure the details were clear as the sirens began to wail in the distance. The sound grew louder and louder, a promise that this was far from over. The battle had just begun, but I had already taken the first step. I had the proof, and now they would pay for what they had done. When I confronted Daniel, I thought I'd be prepared, but the truth hit me like a freight train. I walked into the living room, holding the phone with the evidence in my hand. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. Daniel's face dropped when he saw me, and for a moment his usual composure faltered. His eyes widened and his lips parted, but no words came out. I could feel the tension crackling between us, the unspoken confrontation hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment everything was about to boil over, spilling out the lies that had festered between us for so long. I was no longer the naive woman who could be gaslighted by charming smiles and empty promises. I was standing in front of the man who had betrayed me, and I was ready to make him own it. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt too harsh, like it was mocking me. The brightness seemed to only emphasize the suffocating silence in the room, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to speak. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, but everything about this moment felt wrong. I stood across from Daniel, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt the power shift. His confident, controlling aura was starting to crack, and in its place was a man who was cornered, vulnerable, guilty, and desperately trying to maintain a facade that was no longer believable. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't unsure of myself. I knew what needed to be done, and I was ready to make him face the truth. "I have something to show you," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I opened the phone and turned it toward him. "These are the texts, the recordings, everything you've tried to hide from me." Daniel's eyes flickered to the phone, but he didn't move. He just stared at the screen, his face slowly draining of color. I watched as he swallowed hard, his gaze darting down to the floor. He looked like a man who had been caught red-handed, and yet he was still trying to find a way to wriggle free. "You," he began, but his voice trailed off. He was searching for an excuse, something to say to make this all go away, but there was nothing. Not anymore. The truth was right there, clear as day. "Explain it to me," I said, my words sharp and controlled. "Tell me why I'm reading these messages, Daniel, why I'm hearing these recordings, why I've been getting sick every time I'm here." He opened his mouth, but no words came. His jaw tightened, and for a long moment the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then finally he spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, his voice low, defensive. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, unable to meet my eyes. "It was supposed to be a little joke, a way to get you to take a break. You've been working too hard, Rachel. You needed rest." I shook my head, not buying his excuses for a second. "A joke?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "You poisoned me, Daniel. You and Vanessa. You thought I was just going to ignore it? You thought I wouldn't notice the pattern?" His face reddened. He stammered. "I was just trying to help. You don't understand. Don't understand," I interrupted, my heart pounding in my ears. "I understand perfectly. You and Vanessa were trying to get rid of me. This wasn't about helping me. This was about control. You've been working together to take everything from me. My health, my career, my life, all of it." Daniel's expression shifted, his mask slipping completely. The defensiveness, the lies, they all fell away in that instant. The man I had married was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized, someone I didn't even want to recognize. He had become a stranger in his own home. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but there was no remorse in his voice, just guilt and fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of losing everything. But it was too late for apologies. The truth had already come out. The room felt colder now, the harshness of the moment settling in. It wasn't just the revelation that shattered me. It was the weight of it all. The betrayal, the years of doubt, the manipulation. I had spent so much time trying to ignore the cracks, trying to make everything seem normal. But now I saw it all so clearly, and I couldn't unsee it. Daniel stood there, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. But I was done. I had no more room for his lies, his justifications, his manipulation. This was the end. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, numb. This was over. This chapter of my life was done. I didn't know what was next, but I knew that I was done playing the victim. I had fought for so long to hold on to something that was never really mine to keep, and now I was ready to move on. Daniel tried to reach for me, but I took a step back, holding my hand up to stop him. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance to speak. "I'm done," I said, my voice cold, final. "I'm done with all of it." I walked to the door, and as I turned the handle, I heard him call my name. "Rachel, please. Don't leave." But I didn't stop. I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind me. As I stood in the hallway, I felt the weight of everything I had just confronted. I had taken the first real step toward freedom, and there was no turning back now. The confrontation was over. But this wasn't the end of the battle. There was still more to do, still more to expose, still more to make sure they would never get away with what they had done. The real fight was just beginning. I knew this wasn't just about proving they were guilty. It was about taking back control of my life, piece by piece. The air in my apartment was still, almost unnervingly so. It was early, the sun just beginning to rise over the skyline, casting long shadows across the room. I sat at my desk, my laptop open in front of me, the glow of the screen the only light breaking through the darkness. The city outside felt distant, like a place I no longer belonged. Nothing in the world mattered except what I was doing right now, the task at hand, the mission that had consumed me for days, weeks, maybe longer. I clicked through the files, scrolling through text messages, voice recordings, emails, every scrap of evidence I had collected. I could feel my heart pounding as I pieced it all together, as I saw the full extent of their betrayal laid bare before me. I wasn't just looking at notes, messages, and voices anymore. I was staring at the truth I had been too afraid to admit to myself for so long. But now I could see it clearly. They had been plotting against me. Daniel, my husband, the man I had trusted with everything, had been lying to my face. And Vanessa, the sister-in-law I had welcomed into my life, had been right beside him every step of the way, manipulating and controlling, all for their own gain. I took a deep breath and let the weight of the situation settle in. This wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. This was about everything they had taken from me. My career, my peace of mind, my trust in everything I thought I knew. I had been living in a house of lies, and now it was time to tear it all down. But I couldn't move forward without making sure I had everything I needed, without making sure I could expose them completely. The stakes were too high now. The thought of what they had done to me, to my life, kept me up at night. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I wouldn't. I was done being silenced. I had to reach out. I had to bring in someone who could take these recordings and texts and turn them into something real, something that could hold up in court. I needed a lawyer, someone who could help me navigate the maze of legalities I was about to enter. I needed to take this to the next level. I needed to make sure this wasn't just another unfortunate chapter of my life. I needed justice. I dialed the number, my fingers trembling slightly as I pressed the phone to my ear. The line rang once, twice, then picked up. "Miss Adams?" The lawyer's voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the flicker of concern in her tone. "What can I do for you?" "I have the evidence," I said, my voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I need you to help me make sure this can be used in court. They tried to poison me, and I have everything. Texts, recordings, proof. I need to bring them down." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "I'm glad you reached out. We can move forward with this. It's going to take some time, but we can make sure they're held accountable." I didn't say anything right away. For the first time since all of this had started, I felt like I wasn't alone, like I wasn't fighting this battle by myself. The weight of everything, the sleepless nights, the overwhelming sense of betrayal began to lift, even if just a little. "I'll send you everything," I said, my heart pounding. "Let's do this." After the call ended, I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. The stillness of the room felt different now. There was no more uncertainty, no more waiting. I had taken the first real step in reclaiming my life, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was on the right path. I moved quickly, transferring the files to my lawyer, making sure everything was in order. Every message, every conversation. I needed everything to be as airtight as possible. The last thing I wanted was for Daniel and Vanessa to slip through the cracks. I was done being their victim. I was done being the one left in the dark. As I hit send on the last email, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. I had gathered the evidence. I had done what needed to be done. I had taken control of my life again. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of them, not of what was coming next. I stood up from the desk and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. The morning light was brighter now, but it didn't feel harsh anymore. It felt like a new beginning, a beginning where I was the one in control. I had taken the first step toward freedom, and no one was going to stop me. The phone rang again. This time, it was my lawyer calling me back. "We're ready to move forward," she said, her voice confident, assured. "We've got everything we need." The news hit me hard. The relief was almost overwhelming. They were going to pay for what they had done. And for the first time in so long, I felt like I was finally fighting back, like I was finally on the right side of this battle. But I knew this was just the beginning. The legal battle was about to get messy, and there would be a lot more work to do. But for the first time, I felt like I was on the right track, and I wasn't about to stop now. I took one last look at the city before I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. This fight wasn't over, but it was only a matter of time before Daniel and Vanessa would face the consequences of their actions, and I would make sure they didn't get away with it. The courtroom was colder than I expected, but the real chill came when I realized that this was finally happening. The truth would be out there for everyone to see. The day of the trial arrived, and I was ready to face them in the one place where their lies could no longer protect them. I had been preparing for this moment for so long, and now that it was here, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the nerves or the fear I had expected. It was something else, something quieter. It was a determination. This wasn't just a trial. This was my chance to take control of my life again, to make sure that everything they had done to me wouldn't go unnoticed. They would pay for their lies. They would pay for their betrayal. The courtroom in downtown Chicago was packed with people. The hum of whispers, the shuffle of papers, the rustle of suits. Everything felt like a distant echo as I walked in, my heart racing. The walls seemed to close in around me, but I didn't care. I couldn't afford to care. I had come too far for this to be anything but the beginning of the end for them. I sat across from Daniel at the prosecution's table, my hands clenched into fists under the table. He sat there, nervously, pretending to hold his composure, but I could see the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted around the room, unable to stay still for more than a few seconds. It was obvious he was rattled, but I didn't feel sympathy for him, not after everything he had done, not after everything he had taken from me. Vanessa wasn't there, but I didn't need to see her to know she was still lurking in the background, pulling the strings. Her name hung in the air with every piece of evidence I presented. Her involvement was undeniable. The prosecutor had already made it clear in the opening statement. Everything I had been through, the gaslighting, the sickness, the constant manipulation, was no longer a shadow in my mind. It was the truth, and now the world would know it too. The prosecutor spoke first, laying out the case against Daniel and Vanessa with precision. As the words came out, I felt the weight of everything settle over me. All the sleepless nights, the paranoia, the confusion, it had all led to this. Every word they had ever said to me, every action they had taken, every look they had exchanged, it was all part of a larger plan, and now it was all on display for everyone to see. I watched Daniel squirm in his seat as the prosecutor continued. His mouth was dry, his jaw clenched. He kept shifting in his chair, unable to sit still for more than a few seconds. Every now and then, his eyes flicked toward me, but when they did, I didn't look away. I couldn't. I wasn't going to let him have the satisfaction of knowing that I was still unsure. I had the truth now, and the truth would speak for itself. The evidence piled up as the hours passed. Texts, emails, recordings, photos. The stack of proof against them seemed to grow with every minute. Daniel's attempts to deny everything were weak, desperate. He shifted in his seat, looking over at his lawyer, whispering something under his breath. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew. He knew that the walls were closing in, and there was no way out. As the prosecutor played the recordings, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had heard these words before, those texts, those whispered conversations, the lies that had been told behind closed doors. But hearing them in the courtroom, with the world listening, it was different. It was final. There was no turning back now. The room fell silent as the recordings played. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in shallow bursts as Daniel and Vanessa's lies were exposed for everyone to hear. There was no denying it now, no more manipulation, no more pretending. Vanessa's face might have been stone, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I could see it in the way she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, even though she wasn't there. I knew she was listening, just as I knew she had been in on it from the beginning. And now, there was no escape. She couldn't hide behind Daniel's lies any longer. She couldn't hide behind the facade she had so carefully constructed. As the last piece of evidence was presented, Daniel's face went pale. His hands, once trembling with nervous energy, were now frozen at his sides. He looked like a man who had already lost everything: his power, his control, his grip on the life we once shared. And for the first time, I saw the real Daniel. The man who had been hiding behind a mask for so long. The man I never truly knew. The weight of the truth settled over me, but I didn't feel the rush of relief I had expected. Instead, there was a strange calm, a peace. I had done what I needed to do. The truth was out. There was nothing more to hide. They could deny it all they wanted, but it didn't matter anymore. It was too late. The jury filed out, the weight of the decision on their shoulders. They would deliberate, but I knew what the outcome would be. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no way they could escape this. But even as I sat there waiting for the verdict, I knew that the real fight wasn't over. It had just begun. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking from the weight of everything. The courtroom was still, the tension in the air thick. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had taken control, and I wasn't going to let them steal my future. As I walked out of the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning of something else, something new. When the gavel came down, it wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of release. I had spent so long preparing for this moment. I had imagined what it would feel like. The rush of vindication when the guilty verdict was read, the sense of justice finally served. But as I sat in the courtroom, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, I didn't feel any of those things. I didn't feel the victory I had expected. Instead, there was a weight, a heaviness that pressed down on me, as if all the years of doubt, pain, and betrayal were finally catching up. The judge's voice echoed in the courtroom as he read the verdict. Guilty. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment, but in that moment, I could hear my heartbeat loud and clear in my ears. It wasn't a drum of triumph. It wasn't a celebration of justice. It was the sound of something else, something that had been building inside me for so long, but hadn't fully been acknowledged. It was relief, pure, undeniable relief. But it was also more than that. It was the finality of it all. It was over. But was it really over? As the judge spoke, I couldn't help but wonder, what now? What comes after this? After everything that's been taken from me, after everything I've lost, how do I move forward? Daniel and Vanessa were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale, their heads bowed. Daniel tried to look up, but there was no pride in his eyes, no defiance. There was only defeat. There was only the knowledge that everything he had worked so hard to hide had been exposed. For a moment, I thought I would feel some kind of satisfaction watching them go. I thought I would feel elation, a sense of victory. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't the moment I had envisioned. There was no joy, no sense of revenge. There was only quiet satisfaction. The truth had been heard. The truth had won. But it was so much more complex than that. The courtroom began to empty, the sound of footsteps echoing on the hard floors as people gathered their things and left. I remained seated, staring at the empty space where Daniel and Vanessa had just been. The weight of the years of wondering, the years of trying to fit the pieces together, finally seemed to lift. But there was no celebration, no moment of triumph. I simply sat there, processing the truth that had been hidden from me for so long, the truth I had been fighting for, had finally been acknowledged by the world. But now that it was over, I didn't know what came next. I couldn't help but feel empty. I stood slowly, the weight of the moment settling in. The past few months, hell, the past few years, had been a blur. The pain, the doubt, the confusion. But as I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright sunlight, I felt something shift inside me. The warmth of the sun on my face felt different now, like it had a purpose, like I was walking into something new. The past was behind me now. The chapters I had been writing in the dark were done, and though I didn't know what came next, I knew one thing for certain. I was free. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been deceived, who had been manipulated. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had taken control of her life. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth wash over me. The future was unknown, but for the first time in so long, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of what might come. I had been reborn, and this time, I was in charge. I've been through hell, but I'm still here, and I'm stronger than ever. A year had passed since everything fell apart, the lies, the betrayal, the fight for my life. A year since I had stood in that courtroom, looking at Daniel and Vanessa as the truth finally came to light. A year since I had walked out of that place, not knowing what was next, but knowing that whatever it was, it would be different. It had to be. Now, here I was, standing at the podium at a business conference, giving a keynote speech to a packed room of professionals. My heart raced, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation, from excitement. I had earned this moment. Everything I had worked for in the last year, all the obstacles I had overcome, had brought me here. And I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The room was filled with energy, a buzz of conversation and clinking coffee cups. But as I stood there, looking out at the audience, everything went silent. The moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had worked for, was finally here. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and began. I know many of you are here today to learn how to succeed in business, how to take your career to the next level, I said, my voice steady but full of conviction. But I want to talk about something more important, something that's often overlooked: resilience. The strength to face setbacks and rise from them, to rebuild your life from the ground up. I paused for a moment, allowing my words to sink in. I was speaking not just from a place of knowledge, but from experience. I had spent years building my career, my life, but it hadn't been until I lost everything that I realized the true power of resilience. The power of picking yourself up when it seems like the world is pushing you down, of refusing to stay broken. I've been through hell, I continued, but I'm still here, and I'm stronger than ever. I saw the heads in the audience nodding, some of them exchanging glances, their eyes locked on me. It wasn't just my words they were listening to, it was the truth. It was the story of my journey, of how I had turned my pain into purpose, how I had faced the darkness and emerged with a fire inside me that couldn't be extinguished. My career had flourished since the trial. My name was no longer associated with lies and betrayal. It was associated with strength, with perseverance, with success. I had taken the wreckage of my past and turned it into something beautiful, something that would inspire others to rise up when life knocked them down. I could feel the energy in the room shift. People were leaning in, hanging on every word. This wasn't just another speech, this was a declaration. I wasn't just here to talk about business strategies or market trends. I was here to show them that there was more to success than what we see on the surface. The real success is in how we handle the storms that come our way. It's in how we rebuild when everything seems lost. I'm here today because I refuse to let the past define me, I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. I refuse to let someone else's lies dictate my future. And I'm here to tell you that no matter where you've been or what you've been through, you can start again. You can rebuild. You can rise. The room was silent for a moment, and then, as if on cue, the applause began. It was deafening. It was everything I had hoped for and more. But it wasn't the applause that I was chasing. It wasn't the recognition. It was the knowledge that I had come so far, that I had turned my pain into something that could help others, something that could inspire others to take their own lives back, to fight for their own futures. I smiled, feeling a wave of pride wash over me. It wasn't about getting even with Daniel or Vanessa. It wasn't about revenge. It was about moving forward. It was about showing the world and myself that I was capable of so much more than I had ever believed. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life, and I had built something I could be proud of. The best revenge wasn't in tearing them down. It was in building myself up. The applause died down, and I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. I looked out at the crowd, my heart full. For the first time in a long time, I was at peace. I had come so far, and I had done it on my own. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. As I left the stage, I could feel the eyes of the audience on me, their respect and admiration palpable. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had finally found my place in the world. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my life. I walked down the stairs and made my way toward the exit, my mind already racing with the next steps. There was more to do. There was always more to achieve. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready to take on whatever the future had in store for me. As I reflect on this journey, I can't help but think about how far I've come and the lessons I've learned along the way. Life isn't always going to be easy, and sometimes the people we trust the most can be the ones who hurt us the deepest. But what matters is how we respond. The key is not letting the pain define us. Instead, we take the lessons, learn from them, and use them to build a future that is stronger than ever. For anyone watching today, I want to share this with you. Don't let fear or betrayal hold you back. The hardest times in life are often the ones that teach us the most about who we truly are. It's not about how many times you fall, but about how many times you get back up. You have the strength within you to overcome anything life throws your way. If you're facing a tough time right now, know that it's only temporary. And remember, your past doesn't define your future. So let me ask you, what's one thing in your life that you've let hold you back? What could you do today to take that first step toward moving past it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. We're all in this together, and I believe we can inspire each other to keep going, no matter what life brings. If this story resonated with you, if you felt connected to the message, I'd love for you to join me on this journey. Please hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. Or if you didn't connect with the video, let me know what you'd like to see more of. Your feedback matters, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Let's keep growing together, and I'll see you in the next video. If you didn't connect with it, feel free to share your thoughts. We're all here to learn from each other, and your opinion is valuable. See you in the next video. If you found this video impactful, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with a 1 to let me know if this resonated with you or share where you're watching from.